The morning started with heavy clouds covering the sky, the kind that made the world look darker than it really was. She woke up early that day, her heart racing with both nerves and excitement. It was not just another morning for her, it was the morning of her big interview. For weeks, she had been preparing for this chance. She had practiced her answers in front of a mirror, fixed her resume again and again, and tried to convince herself that she was ready. She wanted this job more than anything because it meant stability, hope, and a chance to finally step into a better life. She chose her clothes carefully, a simple but neat outfit that made her feel professional. She checked her reflection before leaving, telling herself she looked fine. Taking a deep breath, she stepped outside, clutching her old but organized bag close to her chest. What she didn't expect was the storm that had swept through overnight. The streets were flooded, muddy water filling every corner. She stood at the edge of the street, looking at the bus that never showed up. The rain had slowed down, but the ground was still a mess. If she waited longer, she might miss her interview, and the thought of that scared her more than the idea of walking through the mud. So she walked. Each step sank into the dirt, her shoes squishing uncomfortably. She tried to avoid the biggest puddles, but the water splashed no matter what. A passing car rushed by, sending a wave of dirty water onto her clothes. She froze for a second, her heart sinking, staring down at herself. Her once clean outfit was ruined. Mud streaked across her pants, and her jacket was stained. For a moment, she wanted to turn back home, shut the door, and cry. But then she thought of what was waiting for her at that office. This interview was her chance. She couldn't throw it away just because she didn't look perfect. Her legs felt heavier with each step, the mud clinging to her shoes, but she kept going. People on the street glanced at her, some with pity, others with judgment. She lowered her head and walked faster. The city buildings finally came into view, tall glass towers rising above the gray morning. Her destination was one of them, a place that looked too polished for someone in her condition. Still, she entered the lobby, her clothes damp and shoes muddy, her bag hugged tightly to her side as though it could protect her. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the sound of clicking heels and rustling papers. She immediately felt out of place. The floor was shining, the people dressed in clean, elegant suits. She could feel their eyes on her the moment she walked in. Whispers followed her as she crossed the room, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The receptionist looked up, eyes widening slightly at her appearance before forcing a polite smile. She gave her name softly, almost afraid her voice might crack. The receptionist nodded, asked her to take a seat, and called upstairs to inform them she had arrived. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. Around her, other applicants were waiting. They were dressed neatly, holding folders and phones, looking calm and confident. She could feel their stares on her, some smirking, some whispering quietly. She felt every second of it, but she kept her head high, inside. Her heart was beating so loudly, it felt like the whole lobby could hear it. She reminded herself why she was here. She had worked hard, studied harder, and pushed through every obstacle to make it to this point. Her appearance was not her fault. The storm, the car splashing her, the streets, none of it was in her control. What was in her control was her courage. She repeated that to herself over and over. Courage. Minutes passed like hours. She could feel sweat on her palms, but she didn't wipe them, afraid of drawing more attention. She watched the elevator doors open and close as candidates went up one by one. Her turn was coming closer. She tried to calm herself by breathing slowly, even though her chest felt tight. When her name was finally called, she rose, her legs shaky but determined, walking toward the elevator. She could still feel the eyes following her, but she didn't let herself stop. Each step felt like a test of strength. She pressed the button, stepped inside, and as the doors closed, she let out a breath she had been holding since she walked into the building. She leaned against the cool wall, her mind racing with both fear and hope. The floor number lit up slowly, and with every ding, she reminded herself, she came this far for a reason. No matter how she looked, she was going to show them who she really was. By the time the elevator stopped at the top floor, she straightened her jacket, wiped her hands on the side, and whispered to herself, "You can do this." Then the doors opened and she walked out, ready to face whatever was waiting behind that office door. She stepped out of the elevator, her shoes leaving faint marks of mud on the polished floor. The long hallway stretched ahead, lined with glass walls and office doors, each one giving a glimpse of serious-looking people at their desks. Her chest tightened as she walked, her footsteps echoing in a place that felt far too elegant for her. She tried to brush the dried mud from her clothes, but it only smudged further, and the thought of the CEO seeing her like this made her stomach turn. Still, she held her head up, reminding herself that turning back now would mean giving up, and that wasn't an option. When she reached the waiting area outside the CEO's office, a secretary greeted her. The woman's eyes flickered for just a second, scanning the muddy stains and damp jacket, before returning to her usual polite expression. "You can wait here," she said, gesturing to a row of chairs. She sat down, placing her bag carefully on her lap, as if protecting the one thing that still looked presentable. Two other candidates were waiting as well. One man in a sharp suit glanced at her shoes and smirked, shaking his head slightly as though her presence was laughable. Another woman, perfectly groomed with flawless hair and polished nails, gave her a quick look filled with pity before turning back to her phone. She could feel their silent judgments wrapping around her like chains, tightening with every passing minute. She wanted to disappear into the chair, but instead, she stared at her hands, silently repeating to herself that she was here for a reason. The door opened, and one of the candidates was called in. She watched the man with the suit walk confidently into the office, his shoes clicking on the floor. The other woman crossed her legs and tapped her phone, barely paying attention. She, however, was trapped in her thoughts. What if the CEO took one look at her and decided she wasn't serious about the job? What if her hard work and preparation meant nothing compared to how she looked right now? The thought made her throat tighten, but she quickly forced herself to breathe. She remembered all the late nights she had spent studying, the job she had worked tirelessly just to survive, and the endless sacrifices she had made. This interview was her chance to step forward, and no amount of mud could erase her determination. Minutes ticked by slowly. She kept her back straight, though inside she wanted to curl up and hide. She overheard the secretary on the phone, her voice calm and professional, while the clock on the wall seemed louder with every tick. She could feel beads of sweat forming on her forehead, not from the heat but from the weight of fear pressing down on her. Finally, the door opened again, and the man in the suit walked out, wearing a smug grin as if he had already been offered the position. He glanced at her one more time, shaking his head almost mockingly, before leaving. The secretary looked up and smiled faintly. "You're next," she said. Her heart nearly stopped. This was it. She stood slowly, legs heavy, her bag clutched tightly against her chest. The woman with the phone raised her eyebrows slightly, as though surprised that someone like her would even be considered. The look stung, but instead of shrinking back, she straightened her shoulders. She whispered inside her head, "Courage." She approached the door, her hand trembling as it reached for the handle. She paused for a moment, her reflection faintly visible in the glass wall beside her. She saw the mud stains, the tired eyes, the damp jacket. But she also saw someone who refused to quit, someone who fought her way here despite every obstacle. That thought gave her strength. Pushing the door open, she stepped into the CEO's office. The room was spacious, with tall windows letting in soft daylight. Bookshelves lined the walls, and the air smelled faintly of leather and paper. Behind a large wooden desk sat the CEO, a man known for his strict standards and sharp decisions. He looked up from his papers, his eyes meeting hers instantly. For a brief second, the room felt silent, as if even time had paused. She braced herself, expecting the quick flicker of disapproval, the dismissive wave of a hand telling her to leave. She prepared for the sting of rejection before she even had the chance to speak. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the CEO's gaze swept over her appearance. She felt like she was being measured and weighed, her entire future hanging in that one moment of silence. Her lips parted slightly, as though she should apologize for how she looked, but no words came out. The CEO leaned back in his chair, folding his hands slowly. His expression wasn't what she expected. It wasn't cold or harsh. Instead, there was curiosity in his eyes, as though he wanted to know the story behind the woman standing nervously in front of him. That small detail gave her a flicker of hope. She drew in a shaky breath, steadying herself. This was her chance not just to ask for a job, but to show that she was more than the mud on her clothes. And with that, her interview began. She stood just inside the door, her heart beating so loudly it felt like it might echo in the quiet office. The CEO's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, and she could almost hear her own doubts screaming in her head. He didn't say anything right away, which only made the silence heavier. She clasped her hands together tightly, her fingers trembling against each other, waiting for the rejection she was sure was coming. But then the CEO spoke, his voice calm and steady. "You had quite a morning, I imagine." The words caught her off guard. He wasn't scolding her. He wasn't sending her away. He was inviting her to speak. She swallowed hard and nodded, her throat dry. "Yes." It was raining heavily. The streets were flooded. "I walked here." A car splashed water on me on the way. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through, determined not to sound weak. "I didn't want to miss the chance, so I kept going." The CEO leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I see," he said slowly, as though weighing her words carefully. He didn't look at her with disgust or disappointment, but with something closer to interest. She shifted nervously, unsure if she should sit or continue standing. The CEO noticed her hesitation and gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Please, have a seat." Relief washed through her, though her nerves still held her tightly. She sat down carefully, trying not to dirty the chair, her bag resting on her lap like a shield. She expected the CEO to quickly dismiss her, to tell her appearances mattered in his company, but instead, he picked up her resume and began reading it with genuine focus. "This is impressive," he said after a pause. "You've worked in several positions while continuing your studies." "That must have been difficult." She nodded, her voice steadier now. "It was, but I wanted to learn as much as I could. Every job gave me something new. I didn't want to waste time just waiting for opportunities. I tried to make the most of what I had." The CEO's eyes lifted from the paper, meeting hers again. There was something different in his look now, a flicker of respect. "That shows determination," he said simply. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. For the first time since entering the building, she felt like she was being seen for who she really was, not for the mud stains on her clothes. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to speak more openly. "I know I don't look the part right now, but I can promise I take things seriously. I want to work, and I'm not afraid of challenges." The CEO didn't interrupt. He let her words linger in the air, nodding slowly as though each one carried weight. The room no longer felt like a courtroom ready to judge her, but like a space where her voice mattered. He leaned forward slightly, placing her resume down on the desk. "Tell me," he said, "why do you want this position?" It was the question she had been preparing for, the one she had rehearsed 100 times in front of her mirror. Yet saying it here, in this moment, carried a different meaning. She spoke from her heart instead of her memory. "Because I want a chance to grow. Not just for myself, but so I can support my family. I don't want to just have a job, I want to build a future. I believe this company can give me that chance, and I'll give everything I have to prove myself worthy of it." The CEO listened closely, his expression thoughtful. He tapped his fingers lightly on the desk, then asked another question, this time about her past work experiences. She answered carefully, each word carrying a piece of her story. The longer she spoke, the more confident she became. She could see that he wasn't distracted, wasn't dismissing her. He was interested. As the conversation continued, she noticed something strange: the mud, the dampness, the stairs from earlier. They no longer felt like the most important part of the day. What mattered now was the chance to show her skills, her passion, her strength. The CEO asked one final question: how do you handle situations when everything goes wrong? She hesitated only for a moment before replying. I face them. Like today, I didn't want to walk in here looking like this, but I couldn't let circumstances decide my future. I've learned that sometimes you don't control what happens to you. You only control how you respond. And I won't quit, no matter how difficult it gets. For the first time since she entered, the CEO smiled. It wasn't a wide smile, but it was genuine. He leaned back in his chair, studying her as though he had just discovered something valuable. In that moment, she realized the interview wasn't about her clothes at all. It was about her spirit. And to her surprise, the CEO had seen it clearly. She sat a little taller in her chair now, the fear that had once gripped her beginning to ease as the CEO continued asking questions. The way he looked at her, it was no longer about the stains on her jacket or the mud on her shoes. It was about the strength in her answers, the steady tone in her voice, and the honesty she carried with her. She realized he wasn't just testing her knowledge. He was measuring her character. As the minutes passed, she spoke about her past jobs, about the nights she stayed late to finish tasks no one else wanted, about the mornings she woke up early just to make sure she could balance work and school. She explained how every small role taught her lessons: responsibility, patience, problem-solving, and kindness. The CEO listened carefully, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking another question that gave her space to share more. Each answer she gave seemed to make his eyes sharper with interest. The air in the room had shifted. When she first walked in, she felt like a failure before she had even spoken. Now she felt like her words mattered. For the first time that day, she wasn't focused on the mud or the whispers she had heard in the lobby. She was focused on the person sitting across from her, someone who actually seemed to care about what she had to say. At one point, the CEO leaned back in his chair, folding his hands, and simply said, "You remind me of myself years ago." The words startled her, and she looked at him with surprise. He explained that when he was starting out, no one believed in him either. He had walked into meetings where people judged him based on how he looked, not who he was. He knew the sting of being underestimated. That confession made her chest tighten. For a moment, she forgot he was a CEO and saw him simply as another human being who had once stood where she was standing, now nervous, overlooked but determined. The wall between them seemed to fade, and she felt more comfortable sharing her story. She spoke about the challenges her family faced, about the sacrifices they had made so she could pursue her education. She admitted she had doubted herself many times, but had always chosen to keep moving forward. The CEO leaned forward, his expression softer now. "Do you know what I value most in people who work here?" he asked. She shook her head slightly, waiting. "It's not the perfect suit, or the flawless resume, or even years of experience. It's resilience. The ability to keep going when everything seems against you." His words struck deep. She realized then that he wasn't simply being kind, he was speaking truth. Resilience had been the foundation of her journey, and here she was, proving it without even planning to. The interview stretched longer than she expected. While others had probably been in and out in a few minutes, he kept the conversation going, as though he wanted to know more about her perspective, her values, her drive. At one point, she noticed the clock on the wall and realized almost half an hour had passed. Still, the CEO didn't rush. He seemed genuinely invested, through the glass walls. A few staff members walked by, peeking curiously at the unusual scene. It wasn't common for the CEO to spend so much time with an applicant, especially one who had walked in looking so unprepared. Whispers began to spread outside, but inside the office, she felt shielded from all of it. As the conversation continued, the CEO asked how she would handle conflicts in the workplace, how she managed stress, and what she believed teamwork truly meant. She answered with examples from her own experiences helping co-workers when they struggled, taking on extra work without complaint, and finding solutions when everything seemed impossible. Her stories weren't grand, but they were real, and the CEO listened to them as though they carried great weight. By the time she finished her last answer, something inside her had changed. She wasn't just there to survive an interview anymore. She was there to show who she was, and she had done it. She could feel it in the calm way the CEO leaned back, in the small but certain smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. There was a pause, the kind of pause that held more meaning than words. She held her breath, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he said, "I think you've shown me more today than anyone else who has walked through this door." Her chest swelled, with both relief and disbelief. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since stepping into the building, she truly believed something good might come out of this day. And outside that office door, the staff who had been whispering about her earlier had no idea what was about to happen. The silence in the room stretched, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. She sat on the edge of her chair, her hands pressed together tightly, waiting for the CEO to finish what he had started to say. He leaned back, studying her with the same calm expression, but now there was something warmer behind his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might simply thank her and send her home with polite words. Instead, he said something she never expected. "You know," he began, his voice steady but softer than before, "people walk into this office every day dressed perfectly, saying all the right things. But very few show me who they truly are. Today, you have shown me resilience, honesty, and determination, qualities you cannot fake." Her breath caught in her throat. She could barely believe what she was hearing. She stared at him, almost too stunned to respond. He gave a small smile and continued, "I think you are exactly the kind of person we need here." It took her a moment to understand his words. When she did, her eyes widened and her lips parted in shock. "Do you mean?" she whispered. "Yes," he said firmly. "You're hired." Her heart skipped a beat. For a second, she thought she had misheard him. The words felt unreal, like a dream. She blinked quickly, trying to steady the tears that were already beginning to form in her eyes. She had walked into this office expecting embarrassment and rejection, but instead she was being offered the opportunity she had worked so hard for. The CEO stood up and extended his hand across the desk. She rose quickly, almost stumbling, and reached out to shake his hand. His grip was strong, steady, and full of sincerity. That single handshake carried more meaning than any words could. It was a gesture of trust, of belief, and of recognition. From outside the office, a few staff members had been lingering, pretending to work while secretly watching the unusual meeting. When they saw the CEO shake her hand, whispers rippled through the hallway. No one had expected this. They had judged her the moment she walked through the lobby doors, whispering about her muddy clothes, certain she wouldn't last 5 minutes inside. Now they were witnessing the exact opposite. The CEO walked her to the door personally, another gesture that left the staff speechless. Before letting her go, he said, "Never let anyone make you believe your worth is defined by how you look. True strength is revealed in moments like today." She nodded, her voice trembling but full of gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much for believing in me." As she stepped out of the office, she could feel the stares on her again, but this time, they were not mocking or pitying. They were filled with shock, curiosity, even a touch of respect. She didn't care what anyone thought anymore. All she knew was that she had walked into this building at her lowest, and she was leaving with her head high. Her life changed forever. When she reached the lobby, she passed the same polished floors, the same couches where other candidates still waited. Some glanced up, their expressions puzzled as they saw her walking with a faint smile on her face, clutching her bag a little tighter. She didn't tell them what had happened. She didn't need to. The glow on her face said everything. Stepping outside, she felt the cool air hit her skin. The storm had passed, and the sky was beginning to clear. The world didn't look as heavy as it had that morning. For the first time in a long time, she felt light, hopeful, and proud of herself. The mud on her clothes didn't matter anymore. The whispers didn't matter. What mattered was that she hadn't given up, even when it would have been easier to dot. As she walked down the street, she thought of her family, of how she would tell them the news, of the relief they would feel knowing things were finally about to change. She imagined their faces lighting up, their arms wrapping around her in joy. That thought alone made her steps quicker, her spirits soaring despite her tired body. Her life had turned around in the span of a single day. All because she had chosen courage over fear, truth over appearances, and persistence over shame. And all because someone with power had looked beyond the mud, beyond the surface, and seen the strength she carried within. The story of that day would stay with her forever, not just as the day she got a job, but as the day she learned that true worth is never hidden by dirt or circumstance. Sometimes, the messiest moments reveal the brightest strengths, and the CEO's reaction that day would inspire not just her, but everyone who heard her story. Kindness, respect, and faith in another human being can change a life more than anyone could ever expect.